It was one of those nights when the road felt like it would never end. The blacktop stretched out in front of me, illuminated only by the headlights of my truck. The clock on the dashboard showed 11:45 p.m., and I could feel the fatigue creeping in. My eyelids were heavy, and I knew I needed to find a place to pull over and rest before I nodded off behind the wheel. After another few miles, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. It wasn't a big one, just a small pull-off with a couple of picnic tables and a restroom, but it would do. I signaled, took the exit, and rolled into the rest area. As I pulled in, I noticed it was empty. Not another car or truck in sight. The place was dead silent, with only the faint hum of the truck's engine breaking the stillness. I found a spot near the edge of the lot, away from the restroom building, and turned off the engine. The headlights faded, leaving me in near total darkness. The only light came from a dim street lamp that barely reached my truck. I leaned back in my seat, adjusting it to a more comfortable position. The fatigue was heavy now, pulling me towards sleep. The quiet was almost soothing, and I let my eyes close, hoping to catch a few hours of rest before hitting the road again. But just as I was drifting off, I heard something. It was faint at first, so quiet I wasn't even sure I'd heard it at all. I opened my eyes and listened, straining to hear through the thick silence. There it was again, a soft, almost whispering sound. It was too distant to make out what was being said, but it was there. I brushed it off as the wind or maybe some animal rustling around in the bushes. I closed my eyes again, but the sound didn't go away. It seemed to be getting closer. The whispering was more distinct now, like someone muttering to themselves. My heartbeat picked up, and a chill crept up my spine. I sat up, wide awake now, and peered out the windows. There was nothing to see. Just the dark, empty parking lot and the shadowy outlines of the picnic tables. The whispering continued, growing louder, and I could finally make out some of the words. They were garbled and nonsensical, but they had a menacing edge to them. It sounded like someone was talking in a low, angry tone just out of sight. I flicked on the interior light and reached for the door handle, but something stopped me. A feeling deep and primal warned me to stay put, to lock the doors and not get out. My instinct screamed at me that something was very wrong. The whispering was right outside the truck now, right by the driver's side door. My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly turned my head toward the window. That's when I saw him. A face, pale and twisted, was pressed against the glass, staring right at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his mouth stretched into a grin that sent a shiver of terror through me. In his hand, he clutched a long, jagged knife, the blade glinting faintly in the dim light. For a moment, I was frozen, unable to move or think. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this real? Was I dreaming? But the man outside wasn't waiting for me to figure it out. He raised the knife, tapping it against the glass, the sound sharp and unnerving. The grin on his face widened, and I could see him mouthing words, though I couldn't hear them over the pounding of my heart. Panic surged through me, breaking the paralysis. My hands fumbled for the keys, and I jammed them into the ignition, twisting them hard. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the truck into gear. The man didn't move. He just kept staring, kept tapping that knife against the window. I hit the gas, the tires screeching as they fought for traction. The truck lurched forward, and I tore out of the rest area, not daring to look back. The adrenaline coursed through me, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I sped down the highway. Even after I was miles away, I couldn't shake the image of that face, those eyes, that knife. The whispering still echoed in my ears, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me, his twisted grin reflecting in the darkness. It was only when I reached a more populated area, the lights of a truck stop ahead, that I began to feel a small measure of relief. I pulled in, parked under the bright lights, and let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there, grinning, the knife in his hand. To this day, I avoid those lonely rest areas, those places where the darkness seems to swallow everything. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. If I hadn't gotten out of there when I did, I might not be here to tell the tale. That night left me with a fear I'll never shake, a chill that runs down my spine whenever I think about it. The road can be a lonely place, but sometimes it's what's in the truly terrifying darkness. Before we get into the next story, if you're here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. The highway stretched out before me, dark and seemingly endless. It was a quiet night, the kind where the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind. The road had been long, and fatigue was starting to creep in, so I decided to take the next off-ramp to stretch my legs and clear my head. The sign for an upcoming exit loomed ahead, and without much thought, I took it. The off-ramp led to a deserted stretch of road, surrounded by nothing but fields and a few scraggly trees. There wasn't a soul in sight, and the only light came from the dim glow of my truck's headlights. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cool night air. The silence was almost unsettling, but the break was much needed. I lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled, watching the smoke drift away into the darkness. As I stood there, savoring the quiet moment, I heard something that made my skin crawl, a little girl's giggle. It came from somewhere nearby, but when I looked around, I couldn't see anyone. The sound was out of place, almost surreal in the empty surroundings. But before I could fully process it, a sweet, high-pitched voice called out, "Hi, mister." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. My first thought was, what the hell is a kid doing out here at this time of night? I scanned the area, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. The fields were empty, and the trees were too far away for anyone to hide behind them. Feeling a bit unnerved, but trying to keep calm, I called out, "Where are you?" The voice responded almost immediately, "My mommy says you'll be okay, don't worry." What did she mean by that, and where was her mother? The more I thought about it, the more confused and uneasy I became. I waited for her to say something else, but the only response I got was silence. The night was eerily quiet again, with no sign of the girl who had just spoken. I felt a strange sensation then, like someone was standing right next to me. It wasn't threatening, but it was unnerving, as if there was an invisible presence beside me, just close enough that I could feel it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart pounded in my chest. I glanced around again, still seeing no one, but the feeling persisted. Despite the oddness of it all, the presence didn't feel negative. It was almost comforting, like someone was watching over me. I tried to shake off the eerie feeling, finishing my cigarette and crushing it under my boot. As unsettling as the encounter had been, I figured it was best to get back on the road and not linger any longer in this strange place. I climbed back into my truck, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. The uneasy feeling began to fade as I focused on driving, the rhythmic hum of the road beneath me helping to calm my nerves. But just when I thought the weirdness was behind me, the low fuel warning light on my dashboard flickered on. "Damn it," I muttered to myself, realizing I'd forgotten to refuel at my last stop. The needle was dangerously close to empty, and I knew I wouldn't make it far without gas. I fumbled with my GPS, quickly searching for the nearest truck stop. The screen showed one just a few miles ahead, so I set the course and hoped I could make it. The miles seemed to stretch on forever as I watched the fuel gauge dip lower and lower. The engine started to sputter, and I could feel panic rising in my chest. But just as I was about to lose hope, the lights of the truck stop appeared in the distance. I breathed a sigh of relief, guiding my truck toward the fuel pumps. The engine caught and sputtered as I rolled into the truck stop, barely making it to the fuel line before the truck died completely. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. I had made it by the skin of my teeth. As I stepped out of the truck, ready to fill up the tank, something caught my eye at the corner of the truck stop, just beyond the reach of the lights. I saw her, the same little girl from the off-ramp. She was standing there, giggling softly, her figure almost blending into the shadows. Her presence was impossible, yet there she was, watching me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind that makes you want to run, but roots you to the spot instead. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Was she real? Was she a ghost? And what had she meant when she said I'd be okay? I didn't stick around to find out. I hurriedly filled up my tank, my hands shaking as I worked. When I finished, I glanced back to where the girl had been standing, but she was gone. The corner was empty, as if she had never been there. I jumped back into my truck, slammed the door shut, and sped away from the truck stop as fast as I could. The highway felt safer despite the darkness that surrounded it, but no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something otherworldly that night. The girl's words echoed in my mind. "My mommy says you'll be okay, don't worry." As I glanced into my rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there, I couldn't help but wonder if she had been watching over me or warning me. Either way, I knew I wouldn't be stopping on any more deserted off-ramps anytime soon. I've spent years driving through lonely roads with nothing but the hum of my truck's engine and the dark stretch of highway ahead to keep me company. Some people might find it boring or even scary, but I've always liked the solitude. It's just me, the road, and my thoughts. But there's one night that I'll never forget. A night that still sends chills down my spine when I think about it. It was late, close to midnight, and I was driving through a remote stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The sky was pitch black, with no stars to light the way, just a thick blanket of darkness. The road ahead was empty, as it usually is at that hour, and the only light came from my truck's headlights cutting through the night like a sharp blade. The air was heavy, and there was a strange feeling in my chest, like something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was just the emptiness of the road, or maybe it was something more. As I drove on, my eyes caught a glimpse of something in the distance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but as I got closer, I realized it was a woman standing by the side of the road, her thumb out asking for a ride. She was wearing a light dress that seemed out of place in the cold night air, and her hair was loose, blowing slightly in the breeze. My first instinct was to slow down. I mean, it's not every day you see a woman hitchhiking alone in the middle of nowhere at midnight. It didn't feel right. Something about the whole situation made me uneasy, but I couldn't just leave her there. What if she was in trouble? But then, as I was about to stop, something caught my eye. Movement in the bushes behind her. It was subtle, just a slight rustling of leaves, but it was enough to make me freeze. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out what was there. That's when I saw them. Hidden in the shadows of the bushes were several men. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I could tell they were watching me, waiting. Their bodies were crouched low, ready to spring out at any moment. They must have thought I hadn't noticed them. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I quickly realized what was happening. The woman was bait, meant to lure unsuspecting drivers like me into stopping. Once you stop, those men will ambush you, and who knows what will happen next. I knew I had to act fast. I didn't slow down any further. Instead, I pressed my foot on the gas, making my truck roar as it sped up. The woman's face changed as she realized I wasn't going to stop. Her calm expression turned into something more desperate, almost panicked. Then, as if on cue, the men burst out of the bushes, sprinting toward my truck. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They were fast, much faster than I would have expected. The woman started running too, right alongside them, her arms pumping as she tried to keep up. They were all chasing after me like a pack of wild animals hunting their prey. My heart pounded in my chest as I floored the gas pedal, my truck barreling down the road. The sound of their footsteps echoed in my ears, growing louder as they got closer. I didn't dare look in the mirrors. I didn't want to see how close they were. I just focused on the road ahead, praying my truck could outrun them. The road seemed to stretch on forever with no end in sight. The darkness around me felt like it was closing in, suffocating me as I raced against whatever those people were. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. But no matter how fast I drove, they didn't give up. I could hear their voices now, shouting at me, though I couldn't make out the words. The fear in my chest turned into a cold, hard knot. This wasn't just a random attack. These people were determined to catch me. Then, just when I thought they would reach the truck, the road began to curve. It was sharp, the kind of turn that could easily send you off the road if you weren't careful. I took the curve at full speed, feeling the truck tilt dangerously as it hugged the road. I prayed the tires would hold, that the truck wouldn't flip. As I rounded the bend, I glanced in the mirror. The road behind me was empty. They were gone. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, putting as much distance between me and that place as possible. The fear didn't leave me, though. It stayed with me, a lingering chill that refused to go away even after I reached the next town. My heart still pounded in my chest, and my hands still shook as I parked the truck at a gas station. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my truck, staring out into the darkness, waiting for the morning light. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting for the next driver to come along. Since that night, I've driven that stretch of highway many times, but I've never seen the woman or those men again. But every time I pass that spot, I feel the same cold shiver run down my spine, a reminder of how close I came to something terrible. And every time, I make sure to keep my eyes on the road, my foot on the gas, and my mind sharp, because out there in the darkness, you never know what's waiting for you.